This laptop was 80% of the way there to being the perfect laptop for digital artists, graphic designers, photographers, and even videographers. And in this video, I'm going to show you 3 things to keep an eye out for when considering a laptop as a creative professional. And I'm going to show you why I think this laptop is 80% of one of the best laptops I have found for creative professionals. And in general, I'm going to point out those things that you should be aware of when considering a laptop so you don't make a buying mistake. However, at the end of this video, this could be the laptop for you, and let's talk through this. Now, first and foremost, the one thing that really stands out to me with laptops for creative professionals in 2024 is the amount of RAM that you are going to be getting with your laptop. So a good amount of RAM is going to be 16 gigs of RAM. However, I'm seeing the new kind of de facto best practices being 32 gigs of RAM. And you might be laughing because even just a couple of years ago, I was saying 8 gigs was good, 16 was recommended, and 32 was like the sweet spot. But now I think 16 is more of like the good and 32 gigs of RAM is the recommended and 64 is the sweet spot. And the reason being, footage is getting higher in resolution. Our photographs are becoming higher in resolution as well. The file sizes are becoming bigger. The programs are becoming more complex and advanced with the onset of AI tools. And I really think that 32 gigs of RAM is the great spot to be, and my recommended spot if you're a videographer, graphic designer, photographer, digital artist. The reason being is you're doing a lot of multitasking and you're using more complicated tools. This laptop I have before me is 16 gigs of RAM. And while we're talking about it, I'll just introduce it. This is the Dell Inspiron 14 2-in-1. And it is a well-built, well-equipped, fantastic laptop. And I'm going to get into more about this laptop in a moment. But let's go on to point number 2. And that's the display on this laptop. This is a full HD display at 1920 by 1200 resolution. So it's a fantastic 16 by 10 aspect ratio. However, it only reaches a brightness of 270 nits with a color gamut range of 62% sRGB, 46% Adobe RGB, and 46% DCI-P3 at a delta E of 2.72. And so it is not the color accuracy or color gamut range or even the brightness you would be wanting as a creative professional. You want to make sure you have color accurate designs. You want to make sure your colors are accurate when you're producing something that it goes out to other people's screens. You're like, why does that look, red when it was supposed to be pink? That is where color gamut range and color accuracy are very important for a laptop. And really the way that you can get the best color accuracy without doing too much research is just get an OLED display. Now, OLED display, a lot of people have concerns of those getting burn-in. And yeah, 5 years ago, 5+ years ago, that was a concern, but the technology has come a long way and that is much less of a concern in this day and age, if at all a nominal concern at this point. So if you're looking for a highly color accurate, good brightness display, deep blacks, bright colors, really nice, sharp, accurate colors, OLED display would be my recommendation for a creator laptop in 2024. This video is brought to you by Asus ProArt laptops. The laptop's built from the ground up for creators. More information to come later in the video. Now, the next thing I want to point out at why this laptop, I would say, is 80% of the way there is surprisingly, this laptop only scored a 5,455 inside of Photoshop. And while that is a good score, it is not necessarily a great score in 2024. And that is a lot to do with the RAM. The RAM on this laptop, again, is 16 gigs, and Photoshop loves RAM. You can take a pretty powerful and efficient processor like the Ryzen 7 8840HS in this laptop, but then you slightly bottleneck it by giving it 16 gigs of RAM. Now, the benefit of this laptop, and why I'm saying that this is 80% of the way there, is you can upgrade this laptop post-purchase to 32 gigs of RAM. If you go ahead and take off the bottom cover, and you look at the upgrade path of this laptop, you can see that you can swap out both RAM modules, and therefore upgrade this laptop to 32 gigs of RAM and have much more performance inside of, say, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, and video editing. And so that is the point where I'm like, okay, it's just about there. Okay, now let's go ahead and get into the design of this laptop and the usability, and then I'm gonna tell you the third reason why this laptop is almost there, but not quite. Now, what I wanna take a look at, of course, is the build quality. We have an aluminum top cover, bottom cover, side panels, and keyboard deck. And this laptop also has a integrated bezel for the screen, and this is a glossy display. So the build quality of this laptop is truly second to none. I have handled a lot of aluminum laptops, especially at around the $1,000 price point. And I would say that I have seen none as well constructed as the Dell Inspiron 14 2-in-1. This is not a super thin and light laptop, and for me, I highly appreciate that it's a little bit thicker of a chassis. It provides a more durable, a little bit heavier weight to the laptop, which to me translates into more durability and longevity for the device. And so for me, that really stands out as something different in the market right now. Now, another thing that I think this thing is an absolute winner for is the port connectivity, especially for creative professionals. We have an HDMI, USB Type-A, two USB Type-Cs on the left side. On the right side, we have another USB Type-A headphone jack and a full-size SD card reader. A lot of laptops in the 14-inch form factor are not boasting the full-size SD card reader, and if they are, maybe they're skipping out on the HDMI, or they're only having like one USB-C. It says two USB-Cs, two USB-As, SD card, and the HDMI. This is the Dell Inspiron 14 2-in-1. Now, keep in mind that you will be using one of these USB Type-Cs as the charger port, so you'll only have one available while charging unless you're using a dongle that has power delivery through it. And so that is a little bit of a downside right there, but it's not huge. Part of me wishes they had a dedicated power port. However, being that this does not have a dedicated GPU, it doesn't really need all the power delivery in order to benefit the performance it might see if it was a dedicated power port, because you can only push so much power through USB Type-C. Okay, the next thing I want to do is open and close the lid with one hand. Now, this is going to be a little challenging because the hinge is very, very snug. Now, this has its own benefit. You won't be able to open the laptop with one hand, as you can see, unless you like shake it. And so being that it's a non-one-handed open, I'm okay with that. I'm going to tell you why here in just a second. First and foremost, let's look at the screen. Very rigid top cover because of that thicker aluminum material they use, and then very little bounce. You can see it stabilizes very quickly. Now, to the point why I love the stiff hinge. While you're using the pen, this is a pen compatible 2-in-1 laptop. While you're using the pen, the hinge is very sturdy. I can push quite hard on the screen and it barely moves. And I can, push a normal amount, like I'm using a pen, and it does not move at all. So it allows you to not have to support the screen with your hand while using the pen, and therefore you have all the access to your keyboard shortcuts while using something like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign with the pen. Here's a quick sample of me using the pen with this device so you can check it out. All right, so getting a look here, we have the Dell Premier pen. For an exact model number, it's the PN7522W. A great pen for the Dell Inspiron 14 2-in-1. One thing I really notice is how well the strokes are with the pen. So you can see here, I have the pen, and as I apply pressure and then let off, let me move up a little bit here. You can see that, okay, applying pressure and then you move off, it creates really nice like tail end. So normally some pens, they don't have this really nice sensitivity at the end here. So I have this thick line as I'm pushing hard, and then as I pull away, it really thins out in a nice transition. That is what I'm seeing well done with this pen, and this isn't always seen. Some screens and pens, the connectivity and sensitivity between the two is not as good as I'm seeing here on the Inspiron 14. So I think it's very well done. One of the things that I also wanted to point out is that when I push on the screen and draw, the screen does not really come down. And actually, the laptop actually starts to lift before the screen hinge allows the screen to fall. So really nice rigid hinge, allowing you to access your shortcuts as you're using your pen. And so that's something that really stands out to me as well. And also we can flip it over into tent mode, use the device in tent mode, which is very stable, and then even taking it all the way to tablet mode and using it as a drawing tablet works absolutely great as well. Now, as I said, this device is a little on the heavy side, so if you're going to be carrying this around with you, it's definitely not the lightest device. I mean, it's not like it's going to be overly dramatic in the weight, but you will notice that you're holding this thing compared to, say, a tablet or an iPad, so just keep that in mind. This video is brought to you by the Asus ProArt PX13, a 2-in-1 laptop built from the ground up for artists, designers, photographers, and videographers. This laptop provides a 2-in-1 pen-compatible 3K OLED Corning glass display that is durable and color accurate. It weighs 3 pounds and is just over a half an inch thick. It has all-day battery life for productivity tasks, a durable aluminum chassis that exceeds stringent testing, and let's not forget about the Asus dial to streamline your workflow, providing access to your most commonly used tools. Equipped with the AMD Ryzen AI 9 CPU, 32 gigs of RAM standard on every model, and an RTX 4050, 4060, or 4070, this device provides the necessary performance for even architecture and 3D modeling work. Check out my full review content of the Asus ProArt PX13 within the playlist linked in the YouTube cards above or the description below. Okay, now let's take a look at the inside of the device. We do have a webcam with a manual slide here to cover the webcam. Here's a sample of the webcam so you can see and hear what that is like in action. This is the webcam on the Dell Inspiron 14 2-in-1 and a little sample of the audio for you as well. Now aiming down into the device, you can see that we have a fingerprint reader so you can quickly log into your device. The trackpad is good. However, it just doesn't feel great. There's a little bit of like just a not so secure feel to it. And it's really hard to explain because it clicks perfectly everywhere you click. But there's just something that, there's a little bit of rattliness to it when you go ahead and you tap it. And that just makes that premium aspect feel a little bit less than it could. And so I just want to be really transparent about the feel of the trackpad. It might just be my model that I have before me, but it just isn't, I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10. I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10, to be honest with this trackpad. It just doesn't feel as good as I would hope. Now the keyboard on the other hand has really nice spacing between the keys, quiet keyboard, full-size shift keys, you get your arrow keys here. Again, your fingerprint reader, as I mentioned before. So it has all the necessary aspects of the keyboard that you'd be looking for. Here's a sample of me using both the keyboard and trackpad so you can hear for yourself what they sound like in use. And lastly, in regards to the samples, here's a sample of the speakers in use so you can hear what they sound like. All right, now for the battery life. This is something I thought was good. As far as streaming video playback, passmark productivity, we had about 10 hours of battery life. And that's to be expected, I would say, in 2024 out of a non-dedicated GPU-equipped laptop. Now, we did okay on the battery life for creator tasks like Photoshop and video editing. For Photoshop, I get about 4 hours of battery life, which is good. And then for video editing, about 3 hours and 22 minutes. And that's just a continuous project playing back over and over, a 4K project in the timeline of Premiere Pro. So good results, pretty good results. All right, now I'm gonna jump into the third reason. Now, before I get into the benchmarks for this device, I'm gonna give you the third reason that this laptop does not blow me away. And that's gonna be the price. And if you're curious about the exact live pricing, I'll put links in the description below. You can click those links if you do make a purchase. I'll get a small commission, but at no extra cost to you. But of course, that's what keeps this channel alive and the helpful content coming your way. But the price is around the $1,000 price point for this device. And the thing that really gets me is that this is not a color accurate display. I mean, at around $1,000 with the aluminum materials, the fantastic port selection, the solid processor and 16 gigs of RAM, I think at $1,000, it's a tiny bit overpriced for the fact that it does not have a nice color accurate display. I mean, it doesn't even have 100% sRGB. And so that's kind of hard for me to get around. I mean, it's got so much going for it. The great pen sensitivity, it has good performance, it has an upgrade path. It just isn't color accurate. And that's hard for me to justify with the price. Again, you can check the live pricing if you're interested below. It could be on sale, and then it would far more justify the sale price, I would say, for this device. Now let's go ahead and get to the performance. Now, first and foremost, you can look at the simulated benchmarks, and it has a good performance of the Ryzen 7 8840HS processor. But as we get into Photoshop, we see a 5,455. For me, if I purchased this laptop, I would upgrade it to 32 gigs of RAM, and then I could see myself being around the 6,000 point position with Photoshop, which would definitely improve the performance inside of Photoshop, especially if you have multiple layers and you have big Photoshop files, or if you're multitasking, say in Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator at the same time, which I often have done as a designer. Now, the next thing I'm going to be looking at, of course, is video editing. And the video editing results for 1080p are perfectly well. We have a quick export time at 1 minute and 46 seconds. We have 0 drop frames for playback. Things get a little bit more interesting though as we get into 4K, about a 6 minute and 11 second export time. I would say on average, I've seen laptops without dedicated GPUs in the 4 to 6 minute range, the best being on the 4 minute range. And so it puts itself on the little bit on the mid to high end export time comparatively to something I've seen with a little bit better performance. And you can see the different results on the chart. And then playback. We had 0 drop frames at half quality 4K playback, but 793 at full quality 4K playback, which is usable. It is definitely usable. Anything below 1,000 is very usable. It just didn't have as smooth a playback as I would have hoped for a 2024 Ryzen CPU. That is something I was really hoping would be 0 drop frames. And I would say, man, like this thing has really clean performance inside of Premiere Pro. So that would definitely be the things I would look out for if you're buying a laptop as a creative professional. I would make sure that you have 16, but more specific, I would make sure you're aiming towards being able to get 32 gigs of RAM if your budget allows. I would aim for having a color accurate display. And I would aim for a color accurate display at around the $1,000 price point instead of a non-color accurate display at around the $1,000 price point. Now, overall, this laptop has fantastic build quality. It has a wonderful port selection. It has good performance. You can upgrade the RAM to give you even better performance. And so punch for punch, I think this is truly still a great buy, but I would try and find it at the less than $1,000 price point if you're going to be picking up this laptop. And you are okay with the lack of color accuracy on this display. Remember, there's links in the description if you want to check the live pricing or make a purchase, or click or tap the screen for more videos to help you with your buying decision. I'll see you in the next one.